Well, China's always controlled the price. What's interesting about the price right now is the first time that it's ever traded freely. Ultimately, it's a journey, and it's a question of picking your battles. So there are some areas of a market that you can band-aid fix supply by trying to circumnavigate what China's doing outside of China. And then there's the medium to long-term fixes, which is the development of supply chains that are in safe and loving jurisdictions. And I think that's one thing that I've always stressed. We survived because we innovated and we approached this diligently with a leanness that allowed us to exist in a very low price environment.
Welcome back to the Market Frontlines. I'm Lyndsay Malchuk. Now, for decades, the West outsourced one of its most critical defense metals and barely questioned it. Tungsten quietly became China's game to control and everyone else's problem to ignore. Now, that complacency is breaking, and right in the middle of that shift is Almonty Industries, a company that didn't wait for permission, they didn't follow the crowd, and they most certainly are now bringing one of the most important tungsten assets in the world back online at exactly the moment the world realized it might have a supply problem. It can't be fixed overnight. And joining me today is someone who's never been shy about calling that out. Louis Black, Director, President, and CEO of Almonty Industries. Now, if you've been following this space, you already know Louis doesn't sit here with polished narratives. He deals in reality. And right now, reality is getting uncomfortable. Louis, it's so great to have you back. It's been a hot minute since we last spoke. Lots going on over there.
Well, you're kind of now sort of like tempting me to get controversial. I can't believe it. I came here today to be, pragmatic and correct and straightforward. And now you're daring me to see how far I'll push the limits of defamation.
Well, here is your mission if you choose to accept. I feel like we need to put the Mission Impossible music on right about now.
Well, all I will say is, and I've said this many times before to my esteemed retail base, even though, obviously we've now entered into a whole new sort of section of shareholder base in these huge and magnificent institutions in the US. But as I said to my retail for all these years who have been with me for a long time, better to be lucky than smart.
So true. Better to be lucky than smart. Took a note on that one. Okay, I'm not going to ease into this. Sangdong is officially back. After 30 years offline, you've now moved into production. That's the headline. But here's the part I think the market still doesn't fully grasp. What's actually happening between we've turned it on and this is a fully scaled market-moving operation?
Well, you have to go through the commissioning, which we're more than halfway through. We're going to start seeing some data this quarter in Q2. You're going to start seeing real impact in Q3. We've approached it in the same way we did everything. As I've always said, I always think what a junior miner will do, and then I do exactly the opposite, because that seems to work quite well. The mine itself was into commercial production at the end of last year. So the ROM pad is full. We are finding that our block model is reliable. It's robust. We have greater grade and more tonnage than we originally anticipated. And the plant itself is under the auspicious management of Metso Autotech as they organize and supervise the commissioning. So Metso they're really driving this bus at this moment. And I think, we're walking to the finish line as we've always done, but so far so good. I think a month ago, someone asked me this question, and I was like, well, when you're an operator and you've done this for a long time, you don't feel like, good or bad. You sort of just keep focusing on the hurdles. But now I'm getting a bit of a twinge of excitement because I'm seeing, firstly, the price of tungsten. Secondly, I'm seeing the exhaustive amount of material that we have. And I'm also seeing the plant hit its bogeys. And I've got through the biggest area of concern for me, which is the grinding circuit. So the grinding circuit signed off, and that's great. That was for me, it was a big sense of relief. And now, but you got to remember, this isn't our first rodeo. I know everyone's in the tungsten business now and everyone's got a better project than Sangdong. And, we're just a bunch of chances. And what do we really know? I get it. But the difference is we've done this for 5 generations. When we were, speaking about tungsten, when we were building projects, when we were getting hard floors, no cap on the upside, and we were getting tier 1 project finance lending, everyone was saying, oh, you're an idiot, you're in tungsten. Now, of course, we're the smartest guy in the room, but we earned our place at the table. And I think that's one thing that I've always stressed. We survived because we innovated and we approached this diligently with a leanness that allowed us to exist in a very low price environment. Some years weren't pretty, but we're still here. And that's the difference.
That's the truth right there. Louis, what do you think the friction points are right now that people either don't see or they're just choosing to ignore?
Well, human capital is very important.
Right.
If you don't know how to process material, you will fail. It doesn't matter on the price.
Yeah.
Because you could be advertising a project with, 7 years of reserves, but you're getting less than 50%, closer to 40% recovery, and you're only got about 3 years of reserves. So as an investor, which I am, remember, I'm a significant investor in Almonty. I put millions of my own money into this. As an investor, you've got to look at the human capital. Do the guys know what they're doing? Because if they don't, how do they even know the project they have is any good? So it's very important. And that really is the trickiest thing for the market. The good news is tungsten's quite unique in this regard. We're not in crisis. The recycling is very mature. And so we don't, we can't, anyone who says, oh, if we don't build this mine, life is over. It's not true. We're allocating tungsten to the, national security elements like defense, and perhaps the car space is getting less exposure. They're getting less allocation, or they're getting slower allocation. So we're really focused on quality over quantity. And that's really important. And I think that's going to give us longevity. And that's not just me, it's the industrial base as well.
Well, there's a big tension that's also there as well. Now, for years, the West talked about that supply chain risk like it was theoretical. Now, it's not. I mean, China still dominates the tungsten, and not just mining, not just processing, and not just, pricing power. They still, unfortunately, dominate that. So I'll ask you straight. Are governments and industrial buyers actually changing behavior, or are they still talking a big game while quietly relying on the same system?
Oh, no. Government genuinely is trying to source solutions. But of course, democratic governments are an interesting idea because they're very much governed by rules and regulations, which means they can't really be very nimble. They have to come up with the idea. Then they have to go and introduce the regulations to allow them to explore the idea and then to execute the idea. So whereas a totalitarian state, Gigi can wake up and he say, you know what, I want to do this today, and it's done by lunchtime. So it's a very different approach. We don't have that kind of creative nimbleness that perhaps we need in the short term. But the great thing about democracy is that once it starts rolling, it rolls. It's a steamroller.
So if things are changing, then does that finally break the idea that tungsten pricing has to follow China's lead?
Well, China's always controlled the price. What's interesting about the price right now is the first time that it's ever traded freely. We don't really know what tungsten's worth because we haven't seen any visibility in pricing for 30 years, for a generation. So what is it actually worth to the market? We don't know. Is it higher? Is it lower than this? We don't know. What we do know is demand destruction comes about from lack of availability rather than price, because you use so little of the tungsten in the end process, it doesn't have any impact on its use. So this is going to be a 5-6 year journey of discovery of what the value is. Once China's recycling industry starts to catch up with the West, which will take 5 or 6 years, it's going to be a pretty crazy time. And then we'll see balance. Balance will come in 5 to 6 years as recycling really matures in China.
Okay, so then let's shift over to execution, because this is actually where stories usually fall apart. I mean, you've got Sangdong ramping up, you've got Portugal producing, you've got the U.S. coming into the mix. So from the inside, I mean, where does this actually get hard? Not on paper, not in presentations, but in reality, what's hard?
Everything.
Okay, unpack that.
I mean, it's a mind-numbing slog that reminds me every day that, I should have married better and just married, an heiress, because It's a mind-numbing journey of bureaucracy, but that's the price you pay for working in a democracy. There are pros and cons to a democracy. The pros, of course, easily outweigh the cons, but the cons are a miserable journey. It's not for the faint-hearted. You can't, they say, oh, I'm going to be open in 2 years. No, you're not. Even the Chinese couldn't build in Kazakhstan the best project that existed there. It took them 5 years. And this is a place where it's Russian satellite. So if it takes the Chinese 5 years to open a mine, we're not going to do it in under 6 or 7. It took me 10 in Korea.
But that's across the board in all mining. You're seeing that it takes, a good 10 years across all mining. So why would this be any different?
It's not. I mean, ultimately, it's a journey.
Right.
And it's a question of picking your battles. So there are some areas of a market that you can band-aid to fix supply by trying to circumnavigate what China's doing outside of China. And then there's the medium to long-term fixes, which is the development of supply chains that are in safe and loving jurisdictions.
Okay. So let's hit on something that feels less talked about then, but could really actually end up being one of the most strategic shifts you've made this year. April 13th, you announced the move to redomicile to the United States. And then just weeks later, on May 6th, you bring in a new CFO. Now, I don't know how to say his last name, so I'm not even going to try. Maybe you can give us some insights on that. But he's someone with deep capital markets and institutional experience. So right as Sangdong is moving into production and scale. Louis, I mean, that's a very deliberate sequence of events there. So what's the real play here? I mean, are you aligned? Are you
patience?
Okay.
Just take a deep breath.
Here we go.
And just have some patience.
Okay. So
this plan is being executed, perhaps slower than some would like, but then retail are not very patient. But there is a plan here. 2024, we made the decision to move to the NASDAQ and redomicile. We are now officially considered a United States company. Montana, great state. I can't recommend it enough. It's it is a beautiful place. And yes, you'll go on the map and say, oh, Dillon's very small. You know what? There's something about beautiful small towns and beautiful locations like Montana that make it all worthwhile. And as for Jorge joining us as CFO, we need always, to keep, as they say, upgrading the bullpen. We need to always be upgrading the team. Maybe that includes me one day. I mean, I'm still an investor, but but what's important is value. And we are now we've migrated from a junior to a mid-cap. We have a great following in the US. We have great liquidity. Jorge is a natural fit when we're about to generate vast amounts of revenue at a price that's 11 times what we modeled career at. I mean, not twice, but 11 times. I haven't even modeled this mine at this because I look like I'm making up numbers. So we were fortunate. Jorge was available. We liked him very much. We like him very much. Our institutions like him. Our bankers like him. It was a natural fit as we keep upgrading. Our previous CFO was part of the launch team, slow and steady hands. And now, of course, we have somebody with a very deep knowledge of mining. And that's important. But I want to point out, this does not mean that I'm going to be leaving my lane. Oh, I'm going to do some tin and I'm going to do some zinc and I'm going to do some copper. I only know tungsten and molybdenum. Outside of that, it's a blur. It's just a total blur. I know tungsten and molybdenum. I'd rather be top of my game in those sectors because I know the market, I know the customers, I know how to do it, than try and be one size, to fit everything. One size fits everything. Stay in your lane in life.
Stay in your lane. Know what you know. Louis, are you aligning the company more directly with U.S. defense and industrial policy, or unlocking a different tier of capital, or really, are you setting up for something bigger that the market hasn't fully connected yet?
Well, I mean, obviously, we provide into the U.S. national security, but it's the whole Western security because all of our customers who are vertical aren't exclusively in one territory. They may move products around that end up in the US, but they may start their journey in South Korea, or they may start their journey in Europe. So, we say, yes, we supply the US defense space, but we also supply into Europe and to Japan and into South Korea. So it's a very different environment. You've got to think more global. The world didn't stop being global. U.S. national security is extremely important. As an American, despite my accent, it's an important thing to focus on because we have the luxury of being able to do it. But as for what's going to happen in the future, I think we've been public where we've said we are going to be downstreaming in Korea. It's very important. They also have a similar problem. Their national security is based more around the semiconductors, which of course then leads us into AI and all these good stuff. So we are looking at that. Whether I go further than that is at the moment not in my wheelhouse, but you never know. Never say never. Always be ready to pivot. And we are also working on some very creative solutions that would provide a Band-Aid fix to a lot of our customers who ultimately are governments anyway. I mean, they're one of the same. They're very much linked. So we're not resting on our laurels. I still remember what happened to BlackBerry. And I know I hate to say that, you being in Canada, but quite frankly, that was a bit of a miss. That was a bit of a miss.
Really, hit and a miss.
So we have to work very hard to constantly be looking at how we stay at the top. And even if that means that I start to look to invest into tungsten assets I think are viable so we can keep our sort of fingers on the pulse, get our influence still there, use our technology in other sites, we'll also do that. So we are looking at, consolidating our domination for the benefits of 75% of the market, which is really the five families, so that we can keep finding solutions for them and they in turn for their respective governments.
So now I think I want to hit something that the market, I believe, is still sleepwalking through here. Now, tungsten used to be an industrial metal story. That's gone. Now it's a defense, it's in defense, it's in semiconductors, AI infrastructure, all competing for the same supply. So when you look at that demand stack building at the same time supply is tightening, are we still underestimating how aggressive this market could get? Not just higher, but structurally different?
Well, I think we're going to see more consolidation in the downstream. I mean, we saw an announcement a few days ago from one of my customers out of Pennsylvania who announced they were going to be running a stockpile of tungsten oxide in the United States. So it's, GDP made that announcement. So I think you're going to see more and more consolidation. China's been setting the price. Their demand is also fueling this price, and they have a supply squeeze as well. They're a net importer of concentrates, and now they're getting into the scrap business, which is another dynamic part of what we're seeing. I'm also seeing traders scream, "Oh no, the price is collapsing," because they're all looking for a margin under Project Volt. But that's traders. But there's no evidence that this is going to subside anytime soon. I don't believe it will ever drop below 1,000 again. That would be my bet, because ultimately it should never have been below that in the first place. It was a fabricated price. We have to remember it was not a market price. And so whether we like it or not, we don't really know it's going to settle, but we know what it costs to produce, whether it be here or whether it be in China. We have a very good sense. We were able to not compete against China, but we could survive in a Chinese environment. So I think we're in for, as I said, a 5-6 year run of fairly chaotic pricing until China brings balance through their recycling.
There's a lot going on for sure. I know a lot of our audience, they want a little bit of a high-level update. Well, not high-level. They want an in-depth update, but we have very limited time. What is the update with Sangdong right now?
Well, I think in the morning when I wake up, I look in the mirror and I count the wrinkles on my forehead.
We're doing well.
And they're getting less.
Ah.
Let's put it that way.
Okay. Touche.
I think that really sums up how I view Sangdong.
Okay, so that's...
There were wrinkles, and now there are less.
That's a great thing.
Listen, okay, to make it clear, because I understand in Canada, it's any kind of analogies are going to be a bit more colorful.
Yep, absolutely.
I am worrying less about waking up in the morning than I was.
There it is, folks. It is.
I am. So for all of your viewers in Canada, to make it nice and clear, I sleep a bit better. I wake up with a bit more zip in my step, and I don't dread reading my reports that I'm going to look waiting for the disaster that fortunately never came. But that's the trial and tribulation of building in a democracy. You never really know what tomorrow brings. I'm feeling excited and I'm feeling good because we're about to launch. We're launching in a price that has never existed before since the 50s, when it was more valuable than gold.
This is true. So unheard of.
I mean, I do know that my shareholders' love for the company is going to continue to, deepen, and I'm going to finally be able to get all new friends.
Oh, finally! It's about time, Louis.
I have to be honest. I was getting a bit over them. I want some classier friends, and I'm thinking with a $3,300 MTU price, that'll get them for me.
So, what do you do in that point? Like, do you put an ad out, or like, how does that work?
Oh no! At $3,300 an MTU, they come to you.
Touche. Okay.
Trust me.
Okay. Now, Louis.
Remember, I own 8.5% of the company. Believe me.
Everyone wants to be your friend now.
What can I say? It had to happen. The good news is, if it happens, all of my shareholders are happy. So that's really what it's ultimately about. Everything else is irrelevant. As long as the shareholders are saying, you know what, I get value, I get yield, I'm happy. That is my job. I think people tend to forget that in the mining space, or at least in the junior mining space. This is about shareholder value, accretion. They have to make returns. That is your sole job. And I think we've kept all the value in the business for long enough. And now, like in every great super cycle in commodities, and this is sort of a super cycle in tungsten, because you've supercharged it because it's never traded in the free market for a generation, this value has exploded. And when they start seeing the numbers of what this thing does in this price, I mean, even next week, I have my numbers out for Portugal. I haven't made that much money in Portugal for 20 years. So it's been, I think we are incredibly fortunate. We've done a great job to keep the value in the business. We're still remaining lean, fiscally disciplined, which is very important when you have this much margin. And we intend to continue to broaden our influence in the West, in our space, to ensure that we remain at the top of the pile for the foreseeable future.
So I'm going to push that a little bit further, because there are a lot of companies now that are trying to make a run at the tungsten space. Everybody claims they're the next big tungsten. They've got it, and that Almonty is out and this and that. I mean, you've been so candid and so honest, and you've really pulled the curtain back and so transparent. What would be a piece of advice that you would give an investor looking at the tungsten space?
Well, a lot of these projects that we see now were around in 2011. Some of them had, zippier names back then. They've got new names now, and they seem to have a lot of reinterpretation of data, which is the same data they had in 2011. But apparently, if you look at it through a different lens, you can get different data. I think the most important thing is, and I've always said this, does management have a meaningful stake they've actually paid for? Have they put the bulk of their net worth into their business? Secondly, have they ever done anything in tungsten before? I mean, and I don't mean attending a conference with a badge on your jacket. I mean, really worked tungsten, been successful in tungsten, track record in tungsten. And thirdly, and most importantly, the question I would irritatingly ask anybody is, if it's so good, how come Almonty's not involved?
Ooh, and the plot thickens.
Yeah.
All right.
We have a file on every project. And listen, we can't always be right.
Right.
But ultimately, those that pray for our demise because they somehow think that's going to elevate them, it's just junior mining thinking. Ultimately, this is a very technically challenging business to stay, in budgets, to be successful, to get recoveries. You need a real track record and you need flesh in the game, because, if you don't have the bulk of your net worth in what you're doing, why would you ask anybody to give you money?
Exactly. Well, I mean, I know we've run out of time. again. Louis, my goodness, I always appreciate the honesty. Thank you so much for your time and effort today.
Thanks very much, Lyndsay. Good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Again, that was Louis Black, Director, President, and CEO of Almonty Industries, trading on the NASDAQ under ALM, on the TSX under AII, and in the Frankfurt Stock Exchange under ALI1. This isn't a theoretical shift anymore, my friends. Production has started. The supply gap is very real, and the part most people still aren't pricing in is how hard it is to rebuild what was given away. I'm Lyndsay Malchuk, and this is the Market Frontlines. Stay ahead of just the headlines. Subscribe now, and we'll see you next time.